Thank you, Nathaniel. Happy New Year. There you go. Thank you. I wanted to be sure that we were all here. There's wonderful energy in this space. Last night, for those of us who were here, there was I got a chance to see how some of Shelter Rock gets down. Boogie, oogie, oogie. We had a wonderful time with a little toasting. For those of us who have issues with food, alcohol, sugar, other mind-altering substances, we've made it through the holidays. Woohoo! And still standing. For all of us who've had a chance to be with the people we love, and we have this morning a chance to be with the people that we love, won't you wave to the people across the room that you just love so much? Don't you love? There we go. And for those of us who can, we should wave to the camera, to wave to the people who are home. We love you. Happy New Year. We love you. We're going to have a moment this morning to be with a moral and ethical and spiritual leader that we love, Oscar Sinclair, senior minister of the First Unitarian Church of Lincoln, Nebraska. Can we say hi to Oscar? Each Sunday we light the chalice of our religious heritage. The chalice is a symbol of struggle. Chalice is a symbol of perseverance in difficult times. And we light this chalice for our ancestors who taught us through their various religious traditions and by their actions for justice and hope who it is we are to be. We light this for our children who are learning the traditions that we teach to them and who are learning as much, maybe even more, by our actions than just by our words. We light this chalice for ourselves, that we might be inspired to remember our beginnings, today being a beginning day, and to reflect on who we are now, and to even begin to spread our wings as we understand who it is we seek to become.
Would you please rise in body or in spirit and join me in the words of affirmation of this congregation. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. This do we affirm and covenant with each other.
Please remain standing, and I'm going to ask you to wear your mask while we sing the song of affirmation. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of faith and hope arise. On peace, goodwill, honor, peace song through every land, by every tongue. Please be seated. Oscar, it's all yours.
So in Lincoln, I have like 6 inches behind the pulpit. And so I'm actually just, this is nice, So it is great to be back. One of the things that I'm going to be talking about in the sermon later is a project that we've been working on in Lincoln over the last 6 months, gathering an oral history of the pandemic. And later on, we're going to talk a little bit about why we did that project, how we did that project, what it means for Unitarian Universalism. I should say that the project began with doctoral research, but then sort of became a whole different thing. It became about our pastoral responsibilities to each other in the congregation. So we're going to talk about that later. But for right now, we'll just start with a piece of some of the stories that we heard.
What do you remember about when we first heard about COVID?
I remember you were kind of freaking out.
It's so hard to just one image, but one image is I remember President Trump saying that it would be over by Easter.
I saw the MRI on TV of the lung that was affected, and it showed all the tissue where the carbon dioxide and the oxygen exchange in the lungs. I just said, this is bad.
Also images of all the signs in my neighborhood, because it was kind of like living, like we will make it through this. There were signs like that. There was somebody in my neighborhood who had a sign that was counting the number of people who had COVID and had died. And so I think those sort of images will stick in my mind.
Yeah.
For me, it was the pictures on, I believe it was CNN. They were showing the nurses that were in the ICU units, desperately trying to care for these patients, and they had these grooves that were almost bleeding in their faces because they were masking, double masking. They were gowned. It was exhausting work, and they were trying everything they could, but it left them drained. And the pictures of there's one where it's a nurse standing in a hallway. She's bent over with her hands on her knees. Her face is all chewed up from the mask, and you can just tell she has nothing left. She's drained.
We had it relatively easy, and even with the relative ease, it felt at times like I was just failing.
We took pictures of the spider playing the piano and a rhinoceros lighting the chalice.
Kelly Ross had printouts of sheets of paper of how do you get on Zoom, and she had done screenshots and circled in red.
We traded a butternut squash for 2 rolls of toilet paper.
These just flashes of different images. Sean talking about Mount Sinai set up a temporary hospital in Central Park.
The pandemic, in a very real way, put the question front and center: is this worth dying for?
I never thought I'd feel heroic as a DoorDash delivery person, but there were a few weeks in there when the kids were chalking on the sidewalk. Thank you for delivering.
Mindful of these testimonies, may we rise in body and spirit and put on our masks. I'm going to invite Brace to come and join me. We're going to sing our opening song, There's a River Flowing. We begin with There's a River Flowing in My Mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind. I'm going to invite you to get a little motion going in your body. Don't stand so still, because there's a river flowing. Is that okay? Now that river may indeed be flowing in our mind. It fills us with ideas. The idea of the notion of a river that births us, and a river that nurtures us and transports us. But some other ideas emerged. Sojourner Truth asked, ain't I a woman? you remember that kind of iconic picture from the civil rights movement of a man standing with a sign that says, "I am somebody," right? The river is telling me I am somebody. And when we begin to know our own somebody-ness, it moves from just being an abstract idea down into our core and begins to speak to our heart. So can we sing together, "There's a river flowing in my heart"? Big breath, and don't be afraid to move a little. Thank you very much. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. So not just in our hearts, but when we begin to actually experience the flow of the river in our hearts, we begin to see that my heart and your heart, we're each filled with this thing that the river brings us. And we begin to get to a place what Emerson would call the oversoul, the heart that we share with one another, the heart that allows us to know the universe in which we exist, the heart that lets us know God. And so may we sing, actually, "There's a river flowing deep in my soul." There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. Let's just sing back and forth to each other. There's a river flowing. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my soul. Take a deep breath. Let it out. Take a deep breath kind of to the side, imagining all of the friends with whom you walk in this world, and let it out. Take a deep breath that reaches down to the earth and up to the sky. Blessed be. Ashe. Amen. Please be seated. We're a generous people, and this is a generous time. Each Sunday we take a special collection to support groups that are ministering in the world. My understanding from the last tabulation is we're still looking to raise another between $500 and $1,000 for the North Shore Soup Kitchen and the AIDS Center of Queens County. We don't talk about money with dollars very often, but what the heck? That's what we're looking for. So if that helps you understand the level of generosity that you might want to step into. The North Shore Soup Kitchen is a not-for-profit volunteer-based organization established in 1989 to feed hungry people in the Glen Cove area. It's staffed by a group of more than 100 volunteers, including some of us. These volunteers cook, serve, and clean up after meals. UUCSR has supported the North Shore Soup Kitchen for decades. The AIDS Center of Queens County, since 1986, has grown to become the largest provider of HIV/AIDS services in the borough of Queens, serving over 10,000 HIV-positive clients and 30,000 community residents in 5 sites throughout the borough. For many years, UUCSR has supported ACQC at Thanksgiving and Christmas with our mitten tree. You see the various ways to give, and I hope that you will be generous. If you're here in the room this morning, you may certainly drop your offering into the collection box in the main lobby on your way out. Now we're going to have a delight by a moment with Brace.
veloz y fatigada, la golondrina que de aquí se va, por si en el viento se hallara extraviada, buscando abrigo y no la encontrará. Junto a mi lecho le pondré su nido en donde pueda la estación pasar. También yo estoy en la región perdido, oh cielo santo, y sin poder volar. Dejé también mi patria enoladrada, esa mansión que me miró nacer. Mi vida soy errante angustida y ya no puedo a mi mansión volver. Ave querida, amada peregrina, mi corazón alto allá acercaré. Voy recordando, tierna golondrina, recordaré mi patria y lloraré. Junto a mi lecho le pondré su nido en donde pueda la estación pasar. También yo estoy en la región perdido, oh cielo santo, y sin poder volar.
I'm going to be a little unorthodox and say, I'm going to give you a little bit of applause. Because you done fill me with joy. Will you join me now in the spirit of prayer? O thou whom no person at any time hath seen, and yet whose presence is felt in every age of the human family, every page of the human story, in the aspirations that we find for the good, the beautiful, and the true. Be with us as we face the new year. Let us not too quickly flee the passing year, but take a moment to understand what we have been through. Take time to learn from the joys that we have shared, the challenges that we have faced, the enduring feelings which have changed us into the people that we are today. Let us ponder what we have learned. Let us treasure what we have understood. Let us hold carefully our unanswered questions. Thou, transcendent and transforming Spirit, be with us into the new. Let us boldly become our deeper selves, persons ready to experience the stuff of life, ready to risk moments of being sad and mad and glad and sometimes scared, ready to live in generosity and openness, able to lean in to the communities we are called to build, lean in to the family we are to become, lean in to the change we hope to be in the world. May our spirits prepare us for the joy which is ahead, the compassion for others which our faith requires, the careful and joyful living which is our aim. Ring out, wild bells, to the wild, wide sky. Ring out the old, ring in the new. Blessed be. Ashe. Amen.
Last fall, something extraordinary happened at the Unitarian Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. To recap, the last time that I was here, I was telling this congregation that I was being called to Lincoln, Nebraska, and any number of Long Island folks said, "You're going where?" I have been in Lincoln, Nebraska for the last 5.5 years. We are driving there today. We'll get there sometime tomorrow. It's a long way away. It's in the middle of cornfield, but there's a lot of other things also in the middle of a cornfield. One of those things is a Unitarian congregation that has been there for 150 years, and I have served for the last 6. And this past fall, 91 members and friends of that congregation sat down with each other, one-on-one, and recorded stories from the last 3 years. Stories of pandemic, stories of loss and resilience, stories of protest, stories of heartbreak, and how somehow in all of that, the church was an anchor in their lives. And then once all of those stories had been recorded from August to October, we sat down on a Sunday morning and we listened to them, or a piece of them, about 20 minutes out of the 30 or so hours that we recorded. You heard an excerpt of what that sounded like this morning. Many voices, some that you recognize and some that you don't, playing together to tell a story of what this time was like. It's an impressionistic way of storytelling rather than a single cohesive narrative starting and finishing. But in the aftermath of that service, here's what some of the folks who were there said about it. For me, the project was sharing with the community, hearing from them and being able to share what our experiences were. It was a way of becoming close. Another person said, I felt a lot of very complex feelings during it, and it made me feel closer to the church listening to what other people were saying, because you don't normally hear what's actually in people's hearts when you just have coffee with them or you sit next to them in the pews or something like that. But when you hear them answering these questions, I felt like I grew closer to everybody else. So we'll get to why we were doing this in Lincoln in a minute and how we put it together. But before we do that, I'm going to back up just a moment and talk a little bit about theology. It is Sunday morning. It is January 1st. We are diving into Unitarian theology. So to start, what is the most important thing that we are about as Unitarians and Universalists? What do we believe, not as a creed, but as a common value? Love. Justice. Showing up. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Unity. Unity and the inherent worth of every individual. Inclusion. One more time. The environment. So unity and the inherent worth of each person. In our current 7 principles, the first is the inherent worth and dignity of all everybody. And the last is the interconnectedness of all of us. There's a tension between those two, right? Where we say that each individual is important and we are all interconnected. There's a long tension in Unitarianism and Universalism between the value of the individual and the value of the collective. There's a piece from the 2020 final report of the Unitarian Universalists Commission on Institutional Change. They wrote a report called Widening the Circle of Concern. It articulates a common position held among a lot of folks in Unitarian Universalism right now. Over the decades, they write, since the consolidation of Unitarians and Universalists, an overemphasis on individual exploration and experience as the primary, if not sole center of religious experience has developed. This centering of the individual decenters the communal as a locus for theological exploration. One of the unintended consequences has been the atomized individualism of the search for truth and meaning without accountability for its impact on communities. There's been a lot of ink spilled, a lot of sermons preached on the corrosive effects of individualism in Unitarian Universalism. And mid-20th century Unitarianism put a lot of emphasis on the individual. So Reverend Ken Patton, who wrote a lot of hymns from the mid-20th century, wrote in a book of poetry published by the Unitarian denomination, "Our new names for species and tribe are organization and institution and bureaucracy. Detest all formulas and types," he wrote. "Love that which is craggy and resolute and unclassifiable. Force them to say after you die, he didn't really belong to the species. There was only one like him." So for as long as Unitarians and Universalists have been committed individualists, it is also true that Unitarian Universalists have complained about the UU overemphasis on the individual. This is a true story. When I was writing my thesis, I found a piece in a major report by the Unitarian Universalist Association, quoting disparagingly a 20th century Unitarian historian who was saying how individualism has been at the heart of Unitarianism since its founding. I then tracked down the footnote to see what he had actually wrote in 1967 or so. And he was describing what he saw as an overemphasis on individualism at the heart of Unitarianism. So the quote was saying the same thing that they were disparaging. Anyway, well, the UUA has engaged in self-critique over individualism since its founding in 1961. There's also a long history of emphasis on community and covenant. In 2001, the denomination published Belonging, the Meaning of Membership. It explored the theology and meaning behind membership in UU congregations, churches, fellowships. And in focus groups held as part of that report, many Unitarian Universalists reported that connection with other people in their congregations was the single most important factor in their religious identity. Membership in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, the Commission wrote, can be a profound experience, an experience that brings us into covenant with other people who, though diverse in their personal experiences and needs, all seek one thing in common: wholeness. So at the start of 2023, this feels like a really central animating tension for us as an association. We have a UUA presidential election coming up in about 6 months, a process to revise some of our foundational documents. So this question of individualism and covenant, freedom and accountability, is very present in the religious life of our broader association. There's big debates about what Unitarian Universalism will be for the next 20 years. Interestingly, every one of those debates, just about every side, claims the social community-based tradition in Unitarian Universalism, casting the other side as either reactionary individualists or revolutionary individualists. But the one thing that they all seem to agree on is that the individualists are bad, and we're the communal tradition. Arguing against individualism in our tradition cuts across ideological and historical lines. But I do wonder if that binary is too set. It doesn't actually describe what's going on. I love Ken Patton. I love that book of poetry. Leaves of Grass was a foundational spiritual text for me. I don't actually think individualism in our tradition is all bad. So as I was writing the work that this sermon is based on, my friend Reverend Catherine Clarenbach convinced me that the right image for the tension between individualism and the collective tradition in Unitarian Universalism is not a tension. It's not a cable that gets pulled tighter and tighter until it snaps. It's a dance that nobody can quite decide who's leading. So So it goes back and forth. Sometimes feet get stepped on. But somehow it creates something more complex and interesting in relationship than either of the two partners can do alone. So back to Lincoln then and this fall. I've spent a lot of time in the last 3 years responding to COVID-19. I suspect that is true for this congregation as well. The last time I preached at Shelter Rock, it was remote in the spring of 2021, and I was actually grappling with the same question. That one of the things that I've been struck with over the last 3 years has been the disconnect between the universality of COVID and the particularity of how it was experienced by each person. So to say that a little bit differently, COVID-19 affected everybody I know. It affected everybody I know of. But how it affected all of those people is profoundly, profoundly different. Some folks lost access to their gym for 3 months. Others lost family members. Still others describe the pandemic years as the best of their lives, a time when they finally had space and time to figure out who they were and to really thrive. Yesterday, Stacy and I went into the city to show our 5-year-old where we lived before she was born. Hi, Ailish. And I had a couple of thoughts. Riding the D train back to where we had parked. First, I vastly overestimated my child's interest in dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. But second, looking back on the subway car, that the subway must have been terrifying for years. Something that was a convenience when we lived in New York. Convenience, it was the D train going to the Bronx, was a public health risk. We don't have any experience like that in Nebraska. So any real response, any real institutional response to COVID, either as individuals or as institutions, has to hold this dance or tension between the universality of the experience and the particularity of it. COVID happened both in New York and in Lincoln. It did not happen the same way in both places. But, and here's where where the threads of this come together, we have practiced doing this in Unitarian Universalism. We have practiced talking about the universal and the particular. So take the Commission on Institutional Change that I quoted earlier. They were charged with creating long-term cultural and institutional change that redeems the essential promise and ideals of Unitarian Universalism in the aftermath of events that highlighted the vast, vast gap between our aspirations as an anti-racist faith and the lived reality of Unitarian Universalists of color. Natalie Fenimore was one of the primary authors of that report. It drew on testimony from 1,100 people. And in putting the report together, the authors wrote about 5 avatars, 5 stories, 5 composite narratives of the 1,100 stories that they had heard. By using those avatars, they told the story of the whole community through individual narrative. Now, in that moment, those avatars were necessary because the imperative of the commission was to tell hard truths. And creating composite stories allowed the composites to say things that an individual could not without risking individual professional consequences. Right? Saying, "I left my last ministry after sustained racist comments towards me," is a thing that carries professional risk for a UU minister. But if an avatar says it in this report as part of a composite narrative, then we can see the truth of that statement without getting lost in, oh, what church was that? What ministry was that? We can say, I see how that might have happened. So the process took stories that had been peripheral individual stories and moved them to the center of our story as the Unitarian Universalist Association. Took individual stories and made them part of our collective narrative. And so, responding to COVID in Lincoln in the last year, we had a similar conceptual problem. Right? There were stories out there on the periphery of the congregation. A member who had lost 2 sons, parents who dropped out of church attendance because they were just trying to hold it together. Lots of folks who had lost their jobs. But those stories were rarely heard by the whole congregation, much less understood to be part of our story, the story of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. It was a story about Jeff, not about us. Now, the important difference between the congregation and the Commission on Institutional Change was the consequence of telling those stories, right? Because stories about the pandemic don't come with the same reputational risk as stories of institutional racism. So the creation of composite avatars was not a thing that we needed to do in that situation. But the animating idea of bringing stories about this person over here and saying this is part of our story is the same. Because we did need to say something. We did need a response. It's like a lot of UU congregations. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln went fully online for 1.5 years. And we had another year where we were sort of back in the building. We, I think, came and went 3 times over the course of the year. We spent a whole year talking about, should we mask? When should we mask? Can we recommend it, require it? Should we require vaccinations? If we require vaccinations, how on earth do we check vaccinations as people come in the door? Should we take people's temperatures as they come into worship? Well, that's not really recommended anymore. A year of that is a lot on top of the 1.5 years that we spent fully remote. And we haven't really had bitter fights, not really, but after 2 years, this past summer, we were tired, just tired. By this past summer, July of 2022 or so, I was noticing myself being less patient than usual, more quick to anger, faster to misunderstand situations. I wasn't the only one feeling that. No, I am the parent of a 5-year-old. So, I can tell you that often, when a person is irritable, anxious, quick to misunderstand and throw a tantrum, something else is usually going on. Yesterday, Ailish was not actually uninterested in the dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. She really wanted a corn dog, and we had not fed her. We went to bed this is not in the script, but we went to bed last night, and after introducing our 5-year-old to New York for the first time, we saw tall buildings, we rode the subway, we went to the museum, we saw where Mommy and Daddy used to live. Her last words as she closed her eyes was, "That was the best corn dog I've ever had." So the tantrum is rarely about the tantrum, right? My irritability in July was not about being irritated that our order of service was wrong. It was about all the stuff underneath it. At the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, we started describing this as a problem of disconnection. After 2.5 years of responding to a series of crises, working from home and attending church online or briefly in person, We were missing the sense of shared connection and community that is necessary in a Unitarian Universalist church. We had lived as individuals for the length of the pandemic and missed that sense of community, of covenant. So in July, we started a new congregational year, and the board met for the first time in person. And in the midst of one of our first meetings back, my board president had everybody pair off and said, go talk to each other and ask, what did you learn about yourself during the pandemic? And then come back and tell us. And it was this extraordinary moment. Because those 8 people came back into the room, and some of them said, I'm retired. I learned that my life can be just fine when the world around me is crumbling. I got new hobbies. I got to know my spouse of 40 years better. And other people said, I'm a parent of young children. This was the worst experience of my life. It's not getting better, and I don't expect it to be better. And we heard both of those stories in the same room, and I walked out of the room saying, how do we do that with the entire congregation? How do we begin to understand that those aren't the stories of 2 different people on the board, but they are our story? So on November 13th, as part of a worship service, we sat the congregation down and said, we need to understand the breadth of experience that happened here in Lincoln. You've already heard a piece of that service, but the core of it was this piece of audio.
Honestly, it's probably something akin to survivor's guilt, because my life got easier during the whole thing.
I lost 10 events in that space of 3 years. And so it feels like I was forced to retire.
I will always look back on this as like the best 3 years of my life. Yeah, so I know it was, I sometimes sort of feel guilty that I know this has been a really hard time for some people, but for me it was sort of a blessing, because right when my parents needed my attention, I could give it to them 100%.
That's incredible.
And so the fact that, the fact that they couldn't go out much, well, we didn't need to. So it was sort of a blessing.
I was certain I was going to die. I did not think I was going to live through the pandemic. I have asthma. And I thought, well, I'm going to die. I'll just see how long I can hold on. And that was my pervasive thought right at first. Then I got better.
It took me a while to really realize that as serious as it was, because like I said, living out in the country and not being around people all the time, and being retired and not having to go into a job, it didn't really seem different than any other time of life until the place I go exercise stopped when I couldn't go there.
It was probably the most loneliest part of my life. It's worse than being in jail, and I know that. But it was, or has been, a struggle for me. I like to be around people, and the lack of people around me was depressing.
I was at home all the time. I got to be in my crab cave the whole time. So as long as I was in my little bubble, everything was okay. I got to be with my pets. I got to have new surroundings. I got to wear fun jammy pants to work. It was, as long as I was inside, it was okay. It was just when I had to go outside and do things like get groceries for my dad, where it was kind of heart palpitating, kind of nerve-wracking, scary.
it's the creation of the chasm, the expansion of the chasm, that ultimately not forced, but encouraged me to learn about myself and to get started on the path and to get moving so that I had, any motivation at all. Because I think without the pandemic, I would be a much more boring, much more stagnant person right now.
A happy time was when Craig and I legally married. And my two oldest children died of COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic. And so for me, the last 3 years have been just tsunamis of emotion. Huge waves of grief, sorrow, resentment, anger come rushing over me and nearly drown me. And then they recede. And it was a time of change when the pestilence raged the land and we were in seclusion. I truly felt like a prisoner. This is nice prison, but still it was a prison. Could not get out, could not attend my children's funerals. And there is something basically wrong about your children preceding you in death. I mean, when your parents die, you become an orphan regardless of your age. If your spouse dies, you're a widow or a widower. And if your children die, you're just devastated.
Like, I wasn't happy, but I was okay. But it was just like, I didn't really look at myself and stuff, but COVID forced me to look inward and actually focus on myself, as opposed to just doing school, just doing work, and just putting all of myself into those things and stuff. I still do that, but now I also let myself think about me and what I am and who I am and stuff. So it's really weird because everybody was always like, COVID was so hard and is so hard, and so many people died and there's that trauma from it. But at the same time, I became happier during COVID, which is weird to admit to people, and I hate that idea because people lost their loved ones and entire families have died. But I've been blessed in which growth, I became happier and I grew as a person, and I'm a lot more confident in myself and a lot happier where I am. I'm not just okay anymore, and I am no longer willing to be just okay.
So in the room, that was a way of taking stories, individual stories, from the congregation and making them our stories. That person who lost her 2 sons, I had heard that story. But we had not heard that story. We had not understood that grief was present for us as a congregation. We didn't just get there. It was a months plural long process to get there. So here's the how. Over about 6 weeks, members of the congregation, 91 of them in the end, sat down mostly after the worship services on Sunday morning with one other person with a box like this. In the box is an inventory card. A welcome letter. 1 sheet of directions. And a consent form, because this was actually a doctoral process. But on the directions, there were 6 questions to ask each other. Oh, and this part's important. A recorder. 6 questions to ask each other. Simple questions, not complicated ones. When you tell the story of the last 3 years, where do you start? What were the first couple weeks of the pandemic like for you? What did you learn about yourself? What did you struggle with? What role did the church play in the pandemic? I think I'm missing one, but that's basically the list. Simple questions to ask each other. That was the other important thing. As we were building these connections, we wanted to do it with members of the congregation, not with somebody interviewing, not with the minister asking these questions, not with a trained group of people, but we would have the congregation connect with each other through the telling of these stories. And as we recorded those stories over about 2 months, September and October, I spent the months transcribing them, editing the audio of them, and putting together composite audio like you've been hearing this morning, drawing out themes, individual impressions combined into a chaotic, sometimes contradictory whole, rather than a single dominant story without diversity or nuance. Which is not a bad description of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a chaotic, sometimes contradictory whole set of stories without a single dominant narrative. We contain multitudes, after all. It's been a really powerful way of telling our story as a community, not ignoring the individual stories that we each carry. Because I tell you, in that room, and we did this with permission, I'm doing this with permission today, but in that room, most of those voices you heard were people there. And if they weren't there, you knew who they were. And so it was incredible to see after the service people go up to each other and say, "I am so sorry, I had no idea." Or go up to people and say, "I am so glad that this time was meaningful for you. Tell me more. Tell me what you found about yourself." And so you could see these individual people becoming part of a whole community. Not something that happened to me, or you, but something that happened to us. So we did this in Lincoln. It was part of my doctoral research. I've got a draft of a thesis written, thank God. I'm handing it to my advisor in 2 weeks. But it's grown beyond that. It's grown beyond just that piece of research. So I go on sabbatical from Lincoln in 2 weeks, and one of the things that I started talking about doing while I'm on sabbatical is rolling this particular project out to more congregations than just Lincoln. And so about 2 months ago, I sent David and Natalie an email saying, "What are you doing for worship on January 1st? Because I'm going to be in New York visiting family, and I'm trying to think of what other congregations might benefit from being a part of a project like this." So here we are. It's January 1st. Boxes. My hope is that over the next couple months, we'll be able to do this project at UUCSR. I'll be doing it with a third congregation that's hosting me during sabbatical. So my hope is by the spring we'll be able to say, we've done this with a mid-sized congregation in the Midwest, a small congregation in England, and a large congregation on the East Coast. And if we do that, then this is a model for how we do this thing in Unitarian Universalism. How we do this thing where we tell individual stories, but as part of an interconnected whole. To say that it's not just a binary between those two things, and we argue and we all say that the other person is arguing for individualism, but we say we contain multitudes and we are part of a community. So I could go on for a while about the sociology and the theology behind this. There's 120 pages that's getting sent to Denise Hopkins. It did start that way, but where it's ended in Lincoln and where I hope it lives here at Shelter Rock is part of this pastoral question. What is our collective story? How do we hear each other as part of that? In the aftermath of this huge thing that affected all of us in different ways, how do we understand each other? How do we hold the truth of our own story in the context of a community? I think this is a way to do that. I'm going to be working the next couple months to try and show that this is a way to do that. I hope you'll consider participating. So with that, if you would rise in body or in spirit, we do have one more hymn. So, because we do lots of different things after the pandemic, if you would put on your mask while you're singing and join in singing our closing hymn, We Are Not Our Own. I'm going to hope my mic is turned off because I am not as good a singer as David. Good.
Past and present, peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own. Before I extinguish the chalice, I'm going to invite all who care to say thank you to Oscar. Oscar will be staying around for a little bit. We are in the process of assembling these boxes for us, for our use for the next couple of months. We'll be working on this project. Dr. Natalie Fenimore, Reverend Jay Brooks, and I have picked this up as something we want to do, and we're appealing to you to be part of the conversation. As we lit our chalice at the beginning of our time together, we extinguished the chalice at the end. But when we extinguish this chalice, we are bold to do so, because the light that's in this chalice is reflective of that light that is in our heart and mind, the light that's in our soul, the light that's in the river that flows between and among us and flows from and through us out into the world that we encounter. Let us live in the light. Nope. There we go. Please be seated.
Is there a last piece of music?
Where we can walk out.